we've been talking. I just want to welcome everybody who has joined us tonight. So in keeping with the tradition of our first Monday format, the purpose of the first Monday is to allow for a more free-flowing discussion and dialogue of both what we heard the previous week as well as other things. And so I'm interested in tonight in kind of pursuing that. I'm really very interested in hearing people's reactions to some of the things that Gloria Quinn talked about last week. I noticed that there's a couple of people from various agencies. I see Liz on, and I've seen Jessica on, and there may be even others. And so I do want to revisit some of the things she said. And then the other half of our meeting, or whatever portion is left, I really am interested in hearing about any ideas as far-fetched and blue skied as you might think they might be, about what you would like to see happen in terms of new creative housing alternatives. Because sometimes I know parents have thought about this a lot, and some of you have actually worked on trying to make something happen and have come across a roadblock. I want to know about those roadblocks, because not every roadblock is insurmountable. Some of them are relatively easy to crawl over. Some of them are easy to eliminate in other ways. And I want to make sure that we are documenting that kind of stuff so that we can go ahead and take these ideas and turn them into reality. So welcome everybody. Is there anybody here who's new, has not been on any of these before? I think everybody's kind of a veteran by now. So let me just say just a couple of things about what Gloria said, because she reminded me of.
I apologize. I was no.
I'm sorry, who?
This is Vincent DeJesus.
Vince. Hi, how are you?
I am doing well. Sorry, I was on mute and I was trying to talk. I have to hit the space bar, and that's what I'm doing now.
Good.
Welcome aboard.
For those of you who don't know Vince is a member of the DD Council, and he and I shared a ride bus once or twice over the last couple of years. So we know each other from two different ways. So one of the things that Gloria was talking about was how she, while she was here at West Bay working with Jessica, who I think is on here with us, yep, have done some interesting work with a family who, I guess, did they buy or build their own home? Jessica, do you remember?
They built their own home. It was a family that had means to be able to do so, but their daughter lived in a home, supported 24-hour group home. They had bigger dreams about what her future should look like and really wanted to secure a home environment for her. Started expressing a little bit through her nonverbal communication that she was ready for a change. So the family built the house themselves, and it's a beautiful house, but they built it with the intention of one roommate and a live-in, and that's the structure that they created.
Okay, great. So let me tell you about another similar kind of thing that happened in Rhode Island about 20 years ago. One of the founding members of Plan Rhode Island was somebody who was a very active parent advocate in Massachusetts. Her name was Audie Cummages. I'm not sure anybody knows that name, but Audie was actually one of the founding members of TASH. And she had a daughter named Kate, who lived at home with her until Kate was probably in her early 30s, maybe a little later than that. And Audie and her husband, Brock, were living in Mass. And then unfortunately, Brock passed away. And Audie decided she was going to move. And she was going to move to Rhode Island because she had relatives, she had family who lived in Rhode Island, and family by marriage. Her other child, her other daughter, married a family in Rhode Island. I won't use anybody's other names, but Audie's. And she decided she wanted to live close to her daughter. And she was able to find a house that she purchased that was like 2 or 3 doors down from her daughter, actually on the east side of Providence. And for those of you who care about this stuff, Audie actually lives right now, right across the street from our former governor, Governor Raimondo. And Audie wanted, however, for her daughter to experience her own living situation. And with the help of a trust that was actually established by another family member, not Audie or her husband, the trust purchased a small home that turned out to be adjacent to where they shared the common backyards. They were next to each other, but not side by each, like they say in Rhode Island, but they were back to back. And the trust purchased this home and made it possible for Kate to move into the house. Kate is an individual, I should say was an individual who required 24/7 support. She had intellectual, developmental disabilities. She was nearly deaf. She had just about every kind of disability label you want to find, including had no discernible, understandable verbal communication. She used, this was pre-computer days, so she used a communication book and a few things like that. But even that was a chore for her, and so her communication was very, very limited. Her mother, however, was one of these really creative parents who was determined to give her daughter the chance to live in her own place. And so the way she ended up working the support arrangements, she the house had 2 bedrooms, and it was a small house. And so what she did first is she found somebody who was interested in living in the house for free, for room and board, in exchange for being at home every night from 5 o'clock in the evening until 8 o'clock the next morning. The agreement was she had to be at home, and when and if Kate needed some help, she would be there to provide it. And the help usually revolved around helping her with bathroom bathing, not bathing, but bathroom routines in the night, and any contingencies that occurred during the night that Kate could not handle on her own, which was in reality almost everything. But Kate was a good sleeper, and when she went to bed, she usually slept through the night. So this roommate stayed there, room and board, every night, except for on Saturday and Sunday. Saturday and Sunday was this roommate's nights off, day off. She always had the day off because she worked. She actually had a regular full-time job. And then she came home and was on call, on duty in the evening. But on weekends, she had the entire weekend off, day and night. And during that time, Connie, my wife, I don't think she's on here yet. She's been busy dealing with other issues at home. She had, at that time, worked at UCP, and Connie became the kind of the support manager. And Connie arranged for UCP to provide her with about 40 hours a week of support during the week, from 8 o'clock in the morning until 5 o'clock in the evening, Monday through Friday. The remainder of the money that was left over, Kate was a tier E level funding when she finally got to be eligible for the tiers. Before that, there was another formula that some people might remember. But anyway, it's pretty much an equivalent about $125,000, $130,000. So some of the money was paid for one person to provide day support. And that person did day stuff. They went out in the community, shopping. Kate, when she lived in Massachusetts, had a part-time, half-time job working for a law firm, actually, doing some work in collating papers and stuff like dealing with mail. When she came to Rhode Island, unfortunately, people weren't as creative or open with her. And so she ended up not ever working while she lived here in Rhode Island, but the support from UCP was designed to provide her support if she worked. If she didn't, then it was all community-based stuff. But basically, they went out of the house every day, did all the usual kinds of things that people do on the community when they're part of a leisure class, poor leisure class, not the rich leisure class, the poor leisure class. Then there was still the weekend to be covered. And it turns out that the weekend coverage required another 40 hours. And Connie hired an individual who worked all weekend long for Kate. She actually moved into the house, and she had her own weekend apartment, separate, not apartment, but room, separate from the weekday live-in person. And she, in a combination of being paid and being provided some room and board thing, made it possible for coverage to be provided. And so Kate had 24/7 coverage by a mixture of different ways of supporting. One was a straight room and board exchange. One was a straight direct support from the UCP. And the other one was kind of a mixture of room and board as well as a fee for service, a paid position as a UCP employee. She had a network that Plan created for her. She was one of the first people that we created a network for her. And although most of the network was made up of people that her mother knew who were kind of elderly, they were mostly from Massachusetts. They came and they participated with her. And we identified a few people who were more local, who were also part of her network. That worked. It worked for as long as Kate was alive. Unfortunately, she developed a terminal illness and passed away after about 8 or 9 years. This is where I wish Connie was here. It might have been even 10 years of living this way. My point of the story is that, again, this was a situation where there was money provided, in this case, by some family member through a trust mechanism. The trust also provided the home care management part of that. Audie was, she was like 80 years old when she, or in her late mid-70s when she started this, and she was not about to mow the lawn. So right away, the trust hired somebody to manage the house, do the maintenance, do the routine upkeep and stuff. And it worked. So very much like what Gloria described, there's other experience that we actually know quite well. I also know of a situation where another family had a trust house left to them. Unfortunately, that trust was not well funded. And the end result is the house existed, but there was no money for any upkeep, maintenance, repairs, taxes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so this has become kind of a financial nightmare for this family. And despite the best wishes of the trust establisher, Special Needs Trust, not enough money was made available. And so now the house is currently occupied by this individual and his mother. But once the mother passes away and she doesn't have any resources to augment that trust, probably this house is going to be lost. It'll have to be sold, hopefully before the tax collectors come in after it. So that's an example of things, because they weren't planned very carefully, turned out to be an unfortunate financial disaster, and really also an unfortunate family disaster for this family. So the message is it's doable, but you got to be careful, and you got to work with people who know what they're doing, both in the legal world as well as the real estate world. So does anybody know of any other example of anything like that here in Rhode Island? Liz, has anybody ever come to you and say, hey, can you help me do something like this?
Yes, yes, yeah. This is Liz Wiedenhofer. I'm from Life Incorporated. So thank you very much, John. This is the first time that I've come to one of these. I saw it in the DD newsletter, so I'm excited to be able to be here to hear the conversations. And one of the reasons that I wanted to is because we have a sector of families who their children are about 30 or so right now, and they're starting to really, really think about their plans for when their children are on their own and that they are no longer there, really. So we've been starting to have conversations with them and about different alternatives, exactly like the models that you were talking about. And we've been exploring. We do have a couple of situations that we provide the staffing support for people that were in the position to have trusts that did buy the house. So we have two of those situations right now that we're supporting. And then we have other ones on the horizon.
Are just the individuals living in that house, or are there other people with disabilities living there too?
Just people with disabilities. There's 3 people that are living together with disabilities, and the other one there's 2. So it's really more the trust that is providing the upkeep and had bought the homes.
Yeah, good. I'm glad to hear that is being done. Like I said, we have this one very bad experience. Actually, I'm aware of a second bad experience, which is a little different. This is another family. In this case, it was a brother and sister who were living together in a very lovely home. And the intention of the brother was that when he passed away, that his sister would continue to live in this home. And that he joined Plan with the idea of creating a network and then creating the kind of the legal vehicle to make it possible for the sister to live in the home. Unfortunately, this is crazy. The brother was only like in his early 60s, and he was a long distance running fanatic. And at age 62, he passed away. He had not created the legal structures. He had not created a will. He had not created a special needs trust. He had not done a whole bunch of things. He had joined Plan. We had helped set up a network. We were starting to move in that direction. And everyone who knows me knows that I never stop reminding people, you need to create a trust. You need to do this. You need to do that. And I think he just thought, hey, I'm only 62. I'm not going to listen to this 70-something guy giving me advice about that stuff. And, bad things happen. And it happened. It turns out that some other family member got possession of the house. The trustee or whatever they're called of the will, they're not trustees, they're whatever they're called. He had no idea that this was his plan to do this, and so he did nothing about it. And basically he said, well, I'm sure you're well-meaning, but I can't believe you when you tell me these things legally anymore, because he's not here to corroborate it. And so that opportunity was lost. So I have learned that it's really important to encourage families to take that legal initiative and spend that couple of $1,000s that they need to put everything into place. It's well worth it if they have the ability to do that. Okay.
John, there is a family in Bristol that's probably more than 20 years ago now. Did something similar. It was a single parent. She had three children with IDD, and she had envisioned her being their caretaker much longer, but was fairly young when she was diagnosed. That she didn't have a long time to live. It wasn't going to be quick. And I found out about a year or two, I think, before she passed, that she had something terminal. And she set them up with the house, and I know they're still there because when I drive by, I see them. So that's been going on for quite some time. I don't know how it got set up that far back, but they're still in the house, so I'm assuming it was successful.
Great.
I knew them when they were children, actually.
Wow. Okay.
And they're all like the middle one is my brother's age. So it'll be probably about late 50, 60 now.
Okay.
And the brother is a little older and the sister is a little younger.
Yeah.
But that's been going on for quite some time.
Okay.
I don't know how they pulled it off, but they did.
So we, as is everything, every case, when we start talking about these things, we discover these little gems of little known but really great ideas that people have had, and this is one of those where certainly we have an opportunity to expand. I am not the person to give advice about this, so that's a caveat that I want to give before you listen to what I have to say. But I have heard from real estate people that the wisdom of buying a house or renting is something that should be looked at, that in many circumstances, renting is even as good an idea from a financial perspective as buying a house. And particularly if you're a person who is eligible for subsidized housing, renting may actually be financially more desirable and more advantageous. And so I don't want to say to people, you ought to buy a house for your kid or you ought to figure out how to do it. There's plenty of equal opportunity for people to live independently on their own while they're renting. And we've heard about lots of examples of that all over the country. And again, we've heard about various versions of providing support to people who are renting their own place for a very, very low rent, that, 1/3 of their, whatever their Social Security income is,
And-
which can be as
And,
low.
and just to clarify, independently and on their own doesn't mean without supports.
Right,
There
right,
can be 24-hour supports in those arrangements.
right. And when they're renting, it's their place. It's their place. They control it, just like you control your place when you rent or you lease. It's, unless they become drug dealers and a few other things, they're pretty secure in that rental and in that unit. So yes, there are many, many, many more people who are living in those conditions. And as you heard, if it's a federally funded HUD certified living situation, the reasonable accommodation of having a live-in support person is very easy to do and is extremely economically advantageous to the person, both to the provider of that support as well as to the renter of the apartment. And you've heard about that in Canada, you've heard about that in America, and a whole bunch of different states. And I personally think that that's an area where we could really grow a lot here in Rhode Island. I've been working hard at partnering with a lot of people who are involved in building and art and developing affordable housing units here in the state. We're going to hear from them the next couple of times we meet. Next time we meet, we're going to hear from Brenda Clement, who works for an organization called Housing Works, which is based at Roger Williams University. She's going to tell us about all the different initiatives going on in the state that are from state government, as well as a lot of very interesting potential federal initiatives that may actually produce a lot more residential options for people who are in that low income, very low income category. So come back at the end of the month and you'll hear from Brenda, and she'll tell us all about the various opportunities that exist. It wasn't because of this series, but because somebody said that I supposedly knew a lot about rental properties. I interacted with a woman whose husband is in a wheelchair. Excuse me. He had a stroke a few years ago, and they have 4 teenage children, and they live in Providence, and they don't live in an accessible place. And she wants to move out. She wants to find an accessible apartment. Between their various sources of income, they don't qualify for being eligible for any kind of subsidy for housing at the moment. They can afford a $2,000 a month rent. But in Providence, a $2,000 a month rent does not rent you a 4-bedroom accessible apartment. You need to go to about $4,000 or $5,000 a month rent before you can get such an apartment. And even they, despite the fact that they're, I guess you would call them in kind of solidly middle class, are not able to find a place to live because housing is so short. There are a lot of apartments, a lot of buildings that have those kinds of bedrooms, but they're all rented by students, either Brown students, RISD, or Providence College, or whatever. It's probably true down at URI too. So there is a very serious housing shortage in Rhode Island. And one of the things that we as a community need to do is we need to put our weight behind the advocacy of building more affordable housing scattered throughout the state so that people with disabilities can live wherever they want to at a price that they can afford. So I've done enough talking. I want to hear from other people, especially you who are parents. Have you thought about this, and have you run across a barrier that has kind of stymied you a little bit? Whoa. I guess that's either good or bad news, right? One is there's no barrier that a parent can't overcome. Second is you haven't started looking yet. What are you waiting for? One of the things that I learned from Michelle is, if nothing else, parents should be out there signing up for those waiting lists for either the Section 8 vouchers, the Section 8 project-based programs, any place that accepts subsidized rental subsidies has huge waiting lists. And depending on where you live, they're longer in some places than other. They're shortest in Providence. And that's primarily because Providence is not always considered a plum place to live. They're probably the hardest to find in the suburbs. And that's where I would love to encourage people to be looking to live, thinking about why should their children move away from their home communities just to be able to afford a rental place. No reason why they shouldn't be able to live there. And there has been some movement to making some of that possible. So I'm going to ask you, Bob, would you talk a little bit about where the housing, fair housing bill amendment is right now?
So it's tomorrow. Both the House and the Senate are going to vote on each other's bills to go in committee, to send them to their respective House and Senate floors next week for a vote in concurrence. Rhode Island being as difficult as possible, in order to get a bill passed. In most other states, as long as both houses pass something that is identical, you're done. Here, they both have to pass both of each other's bills identically, just to throw another little curve in the thing. So that's, looks like it's on track to happen next week. And then once that happens, it'll move to the governor for signature. If he signs it, he will no longer be able to refuse to take a Section 8. So
Yeah,
it's not called a Section 8 anymore, but it's what everybody says when they don't want to take them.
that's right.
Changing the name didn't solve the problem. I didn't think it was going to, but
Yeah.
I seem to think if we change the name, that might go, all the problems might go away, but they didn't.
And this is a big deal because, well, for two reasons. One is, at some level, the more demand there is for Section 8 or whatever they're called, mainstream vouchers or
Housing choice vouchers.
housing choice vouchers, some level, the more demand there is, the more likely we are to get more of them in the state. So it's important for people to say we need them. The other part is that they're time limited. You only have a little bit of time. I think it's like 45 days in Rhode Island to use them. And so a lot of people say, I got one, but I couldn't find a place in the time that I had to find a place because, as Bob said, the landlord would say, oh, sorry, I just don't accept those kinds of payments. That would now be illegal for landlords to do that. And just to be perfectly clear about this, that's an act of discrimination that is not allowed in Massachusetts, for example, or Connecticut. And that will make this whole process easier. If anybody remembers my friend Bob Geller, does anybody remember Bob? Anybody? Bob was very active in the DD Council, and Bob got himself one of those Section 8 vouchers, and he was really good at turning them over. Before he moved out of state, he was living on a beachfront house that he rented totally with his Section 8 voucher in Point Judith. I have no idea what the rent was, but his share of it was only 1/3 of his SSI, which is all that he was getting. The only caveat is that the landlord has to can't charge more than the market rate for the apartment. So they can't gouge the federal government by saying, oh, this costs $4,000 and the person gives $250 and the federal government pays $3,250. But this is a huge step forward.
So John, I've been working with, like I said, from this call offline, several parents and individuals. And really, I do think the housing choice voucher or the mainstream voucher, it's the same as the housing choice voucher, but you have to have a disability to be eligible to apply. But it really gets to everything you're saying. It actually gives you choice. And again, we don't have a huge housing stock in Rhode Island right now, so it's not easy to find a unit out there, but it does allow you to rent a house or an apartment or a townhouse, whatever, the rental that you're looking for is. But what's incredible, and this, Rhode Island's come a long way, it might not seem like that to everyone on this call, but we have 26 different public housing authorities, and now there's an online central waiting list for 15 of them, which is huge because before you had to go to every single housing authority and apply. And just, I encourage everyone to do it and to check off Providence, whether you want to live in Providence or not. Providence is one of the few public housing authorities that will let you take the voucher outside of their jurisdiction. Every housing authority has their own administrative plan. So, some housing authorities, if you get a voucher from that housing authority, you have to lease up in that community, but Providence doesn't. So I just, say to people, check it off and then talk to the housing authority later to see what the plan is. If you get to the top of the list and you don't want a voucher, you can say no, but it's just the wait is so long that sometimes it just gives you the time to plan while you wait. And I really am trying to get every case manager that VHDDH oversees at every agency, behavioral health and developmental disabilities, to, the first time they meet someone, when someone comes into the program, say, what's your housing situation? Do you want this list? Because you could be living with your family now and be very happy, but 10 years from now, when you actually want to leave, that's not the time to apply, because then you have a 3 to 10 year wait. So I can't say enough about the housing choice voucher.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. You have to have a lot of money to think about owning, buying a house or whatever. And that's not something that's in the realm of possibility for most families. Yeah, and in fact, I'm going to add on what Michelle said, and that is, when Mark moved out into his own place, he actually did not have sufficient funding to be able to live there with all of the support that he needed because of the CIS level that he was assigned to. But we jumped at that chance because anybody will figure this out, but we figured it out. That is, he has an apartment. He doesn't have to live in that apartment all of the time. As long as he pays the rent, it's his apartment. And so as long as he lives in there most of the time. And so literally he lives there 5.5 days a week. And then he comes home with us on weekends. Between that accommodation of coming home on weekends. He's able to live in his own place all week long, get the support he needs to be able to thrive there. He calls it his castle. He loves being there. He loves being on his own. And he's not on here, so I can tell you that we love him being on his own too. But we also love him living with us on weekends. So even if, if an opportunity presents and, your child gets one of those apartments or vouchers, don't feel like you could have to turn it down just because you don't have all of the support solutions all worked out. As long as the rent is paid, it's his place 24/7, but he doesn't have to live there 24/7. In public housing, you have to live there most of the time, but even that it varies from place to place.
Yeah, I think we really should encourage people that just, as part of transition from school to adult services, 100% sign up. And if at some point you find you don't need it, not going to need a house, then you can pass when the voucher becomes available.
Right.
We should all be signing up because it gives you a lot of options creatively. I mean, I worked with some families in Mass that there were three families that got together, and their kids all knew each other and were willing to live together. And between the three of them, they had enough support, and they had luckily signed up for vouchers, and vouchers were available. And we set up the place so that they could all three of them rent the same place on a voucher by subdividing it, so they were all just renting their rooms. It worked out really well. With the three vouchers, there was enough money to go around, and everybody, and with the amount of supports they had, sharing them between the three at work. So
yeah, just talking
in
about.
fact, what we did was we found a house ourselves, and I had lined up some investors that were buying group homes and doing 10-year leases back to the provider, and that's what they did. Was the three of them signed a 10-year lease with the vouchers, and everybody was happy.
I'm actually aware of a variation on that, both in Massachusetts and in state of Washington. And that is a family who had a daughter with developmental disabilities bought a house, a big house, and then they rehabbed the house and added a couple of apartments to that house. They then became landlords, and they accepted other people with Section 8 vouchers to rent the other apartments. And so they were able to finance the purchase of that house for their daughter, with the rent being paid by the other non-disabled tenants, and but who were on Section 8, so that they were able to guarantee a pretty good rental rate, enough to cover their mortgage. I think it's a very clever way of doing this, which allowed their daughter to have her own apartment, and then to have a couple of other people live in the place who were willing to provide kind of emergency intervention when and if that daughter needed that emergency intervention. The point being that, one of the points that David has talked about, and I talk about it all the time too, is that when your son or daughter moves out of your house, you need to immediately, or even before then, if you could, create a support network for them. Because nobody with an intellectual developmental disabilities can or should live on their own in their own place without the natural support of their community. A community either local or built or something. And David is an expert in that area. I have some experience myself in that area. And I know that having a network opens up tremendous opportunities and really tears down a lot of barriers. And I think if we did a survey of why parents are nervous about their child's future in terms of where they're going to live, it's because they're worried about their safety and their security. And having a network is like the best way to guarantee safety and security, no matter where they live, including living in a group home. Heaven knows that people who are in congregate settings could use safety and security sometimes too. Okay, so
Question for Michelle.
Michelle,
I don't know if you can.
Sorry, I had to just run and
Oh.
shut some windows because I
what's the
was
question?
freezing.
My wife has a question.
She mentioned that Providence allows the housing choice voucher to be used beyond their jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Are there other communities
Yeah.
that do that as well?
Michelle, are you aware of other housing authorities that allow people to take their voucher out of their jurisdiction right away?
I can find out for you. There's a public housing authority call once a month that I
Okay.
am on, and yeah, it all depends on their own administrative plan. So I'll have to go out and ask. I think Providence has just made this like flat rule. They actually got 75 mainstream vouchers this December,
Mhm.
and they said to us, they're like that people can rent wherever they want. So I know they're doing that. I think other housing authorities do it on a case-by-case basis, but they made a flat rule in Providence. So I'll find out for you.
I do know that once you are in one of those places, you can apply to move, and you can apply to get a Section 8 voucher and use it anywhere else in the state. It's not
Or
like
the country, John.
Or the
Once
coun- or the
you
country.
once you live in that place for 1 year,
Yep.
you can move anywhere in the country.
right. And that's really important to know. And it's especially important to emphasize that people don't need to feel like this is a permanent decision, permanent move when they move out and go somewhere else. If they don't like where they're living, they can move to another place in a year. If they don't like where they're living and they don't like living on their own, well, you can change that. You can move them to some other place, including back home. In our own case, just as an example, we applied early. And despite the fact that everyone said, oh, it's going to take years in Warwick, it only took 2 years.
3.5.
Oh, sorry. Connie says 3.5. I guess we did it before he turned 21. So he was only like 22 or 23 years old when Mark got his first offer. He didn't want to move. We asked him, and he said, no, I want to stay home. And so we said, okay, we'll pass. In Warwick, that put him at the bottom of the list again. He came up again 4 years later. And at that time he says, yes, I want it. I want to move. I'm ready to get out of here. And so we did. And no, he's happy there. We're actually in the process of working on moving him from that unit to another unit in Warwick, because he has a brother who lives in that other unit. And his brother, who has many disabilities of his own, who originally thought that he could barely take care of himself, has recently come to the conclusion that if Mark were living in his complex, he would be able to help Mark with some things. So he's volunteered to kind of take on that role. So we're going to approach the housing authority and ask Mark, when there's an opening, not create one, not kick somebody out, But when there's an opening in another accessible unit, that we would like Mark to be considered for a move into that unit. So I'm a big believer in emphasizing that nothing is permanent with housing. Although I think a lot of people act like it is, either, wherever they go, it's like, this is the move, we're all done, everything is all settled. Well, it might not be. To your point, Bob, Plan has applied for some funding for hiring a housing counselor to work with families. And we intend to let everybody in the special education world and the transition world know that when that question of where is Junior going to be living, that they should be told that there's a place they can call to get some general advice and guidance about what to do beyond accepting the two stock answers right now, which is, oh, well, I'm sure he's going to be living with you for the next little while, so we don't have to worry about this or talk about it. Or, well, as soon as he turns 21, that'll be DD's problem. And, again, we won't talk about it. You're right, Bob. They knew that does need to be talked about. And if nothing else, parents should know that they can get some reliable, good advice that they should start working with as they move forward. Okay. Anybody else have any thoughts, any questions?
John?
Yep.
I want to say one thing, affirm something you had said before a little bit ago, was that I really think one of the things of the future is the shared space of people with disabilities and people without disabilities being able to kind of live together, and with one of the exchanges being, room and board. I think it has so many benefits to it. It's certainly done throughout the country and in other nations too, of course. And I think there is room for that to grow in Rhode Island. So that is something, and it is something that we're hearing from parents of something that they would be very interested in. It helps with that staff turnover rate for sure. And it just gives that sense of inclusion and community that I think is a great thing. And of course, staff themselves also some are dealing with a housing crisis as well. So it kind of is a benefit there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then there's something else that could also be done that I don't hear very much about. And that is shared living right now is like it's an all or nothing, right? It's like person moves in, there's a provider, there's a contract, the whole bit. I would be interested in exploring kind of an intermediary or half step out of home for kind of a trial purposes, maybe even of allowing people to do shared living part of the week, like on a weekend or something like that. And then the person going back to their own home, either their own apartment or maybe even some, back to their parents' home. I think there's no reason why all of these variations can't be done, other than the fact that no one's thought about it or asked about it.
One of the things I'd like to see with that is if for example, we advertised that we wanted potential shared living provider, and we got 4 viable applications, I'd like to see not be able to spend weekends or,
Yeah, I don't know if you could hear that, but Connie is saying that it would, she would love to see the ability for us and others
to vet.
to vet and test out various shared living situations by doing a kind of a trial period to make sure things that we thought would work out actually do work out. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, And the more we can test and vet and experiment, the more likely it is that we'll come up with a good answer, a good solution.
Could what you're describing be part of like a respite program?
I guess it
Like
could.
where I'm just trying to figure out if there's a way to do it with something we already have, like, and
Yeah,
I feel stupid asking this question because of where I work, but Ann is the brains, I keep saying,
Yeah.
of our little team when it comes to the service packages. So,
yeah. I don't know. Some people who, especially who do self-directed, use up every penny of whatever they're eligible for, but others don't. I'm not even sure everybody who gets services, who's living at home, still gets respite. Mark hasn't lived here so long. I don't know. Does anybody know? Does everybody who live at home, does that family automatically get a respite bundle funding?
That went away. I know my brother was getting that when he was living at home, but.
I'm going to add it to my list to look into.
Okay, yeah, that's a
Yeah,
good idea.
I mean, and that is a good way to try it out, especially if the respite is being done in the shared living kind of model. My brother was getting respite, but when he got respite, he would go to a group home.
Yeah,
So that really wasn't a good tryout for shared living because it wasn't shared living. But I
right.
know, I keep referring back to when I used to work in Mass years ago. I ran a respite program that was both planned and emergency respite that was 100% in home. And a lot of the people that came in, especially the ones on emergencies, we were able to hold them for 45, 60 days and everything was going smoothly. Well, because usually they came in because of they lost their housing because either a parent got ill or a parent died. No one had anything planned. A lot of times they would just transition to shared living, even though they hadn't thought about that because that's what they were getting for respite. So, and the other thing that would happen is people would make the initial commitment to be a respite provider and turn into a shared living because, again, it was for them, too, a tryout of exactly, I mean, the models are exactly the same. You got somebody in your house, can you tolerate that or you can't tolerate that?
Right.
It's much easier to make a 2-week or a 30-day commitment than, to say, well, yeah, this person's going to live here for as long as he needs to. But I had a lot of people that started as respite and then moved over to shared living.
Yeah. And you don't necessarily need to build or buy or establish a facility for that kind of temporary supported living service to work, to come into play.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we found by running respite that way was we didn't have capacity because I would just constantly line people up that were willing to do respite. You didn't have to give them a client the next day. I mean, and you might use them once a year, but we could always take somebody in. Whereas if you do a respite in a facility based where you've got an empty bed here or an empty bed there, as soon as somebody's in that bed, especially if they go in on an emergency and don't come out because there's no place for them to go, then nobody else can get respite. So it's a much better model than the facility-based respite.
Yeah. Okay, well, we're recording this, so we won't lose track of this thread. I think that's
Tell Ann I said hi when you talk to her, Michelle.
I'm going to be calling you directly and including you in our group for the reverse SLA and this extended respite.
Yeah, my problem is I don't have a lot of daytime availability. So But,
I'll get your number. I'll
yeah.
make time at night.
Okay. Yeah, don't worry about it.
So,
Anytime.
so in terms of other good ideas, there's nobody here on current thing, but we had Catherine Taylor who was on previous ones. So Catherine has a lot of experience in the supporting of elders. And there's tremendously creative new ideas about how you help elders avoid going into nursing homes by staying in their own home, by having people come in to live with them, by having people provide support. There's kind of a model, in one of them is in Rhode Island. It's called, I don't know what it's actually called. It's kind of called some kind of village.
Yeah,
And
it's the village. There's actually 3 of them now.
there's 3 of them.
Or there's 4, because I was
Okay.
just on a committee that formed a new one in Westerly.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, so I infiltrated this group. I was not interested in it for the elderly. I wanted to replicate it for this group.
course.
So they had a planning committee that lasted a year, and they just got started. But basically, I originally thought it was a village, like a physical place.
No,
But it's not. It's a community of people, and there are people who need different services, let's say, and people who want to volunteer their time to do things. So it's the same as the plan. I really think, John, it
Yep.
really is on the same idea. So there's a coordinator. So they have one in Barrington, Edgewood, Westerly, and in Providence. And they just, they might have book clubs. They might, help with small projects. Like you can't put out there that you need someone to remodel your sunroom and think somebody's going to come in and do it, but they'll do different items, like different things. I mean, it's similar to what you would do with anyone in the community. I mean, I had a friend of mine who was 89. I used to go to her house every Sunday and help her bake because she liked to bake and make sure she had things for her family. So things like that. So you could say, hey, I need somebody to help me bake apple pies, and somebody in the village might say, I'll do that, or take you to doctor's appointments, or take you shopping. So it's just building a network of people that want to help each other stay in the community. Because there are some things as you grow older that you can't do anymore. And it might get to the point where you can't keep up your house, or you can't get to doctor's appointments. So this, it does what everybody used to do in the community for each other before we all got too busy.
right. Yeah, so it is, from what I've seen so far, I thought it does look a lot like Plan.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, in Vancouver, the city, Plan Canada now actually has used the same idea of creating a personal support network around elders. They started doing it because they recognized the similarity, but they also recognize that there's another difference in actually that's not very different from what we're experiencing. And that is a lot of families are dispersing all over the country. And so Plan Canada said, we can help create these virtual networks of both people who are far away and people who are close, and create that network to support that mom or dad or whoever, in their desire to remain as independent as possible. So, yeah, but I guess the greater point that I want to make is that that whole elder world has come to recognize that it is possible to support people in their own homes with the support of others, paid and unpaid. And, it just takes a little bit of planning again to make it happen. And that's why, why we're doing this. We're trying to encourage families to anticipate and plan and organize themselves so that they take advantage of all these things.
We were just talking about that in Nebraska. I've been involved recently in training over 1,000 case managers, service coordinators, and supervisors and program people. And one of the things that we notice is that the disability field, the developmental disability field, is actually several steps ahead of the aging and disability field and that set of waivers and that set of practices. And it's partly because in our field, the developmental disability field, we've been working away at this stuff and working through and working on all of this architecture since the early 1970s. So the aging realm is now in the process of kind of catching up with what we've been able to forge over the last 40 years.
Yeah, yeah,
Almost 50. Oh, Lord.
more than that. Yeah,
Oh,
David,
God.
we're starting to get old.
Well, this is a good time in Rhode Island because I know EOHHS is working on the long-term services waiver, which, you know, includes both populations, and they're trying to have more and more people live in the community. We found out with the pandemic, which we all knew, you guys,
Yeah.
I think know by now, I come from the homeless world, and it's not good for people to live in congregate shelters or in congregate settings when you're dealing with a public health crisis. So I think it's a good opportunity for us to really revisit the waiver and really look at some of the disparities between what's in certain sections of the waiver, because we do have a global waiver now. So
Yeah.
all of these aging and disabled, it's all the same thing. So I think it's a good time for the state to come together and look at what we're doing to
Yeah.
keep people in the community. So
When John and Michelle, when is our next meeting? We've been having interim meetings
Yeah, so
over the course of the week, month.
well, the 24th is the office hours that we do for people
Okay.
just to come with their ideas and ask questions about housing.
Okay.
and
That's when,
then on the 28th, we're having Brenda Clement, who is from Roger Williams University. She heads up a group there that's kind of a research-oriented group called Housing Works. And she's going to tell us all about all these new things that have happened this year. Hopefully, the prevention of discrimination based on source of income. I don't think anything has come out of a state senator submitted some legislation dealing with, it's called Section 40A in Mass. I think a comparable bill was introduced in Rhode Island, but I don't think it went anywhere this year.
Michelle, do you mean the 24th or the 21st? 24th is a Saturday.
Oh yeah, 21st, Michelle.
Okay, just checking.
okay, I don't have my date straight. Well, we could do it on Saturday. I'm
Oh, no.
strictly
Sure.
doing nothing. No, I'm kidding. Whatever that third Wednesday is.
Okay.
Is
They can't hear you.
we need to send out an announcement to everybody who's registered for this. Include the link and tell them what the next events are.
okay.
Office hours,
Yep.
housing works.
We'll, I'll do that. I'll send out a reminder with the registration process. Everyone's registered. They just
They just need the link.
no, but we can't do it that way, hon. But we'll take care of it. Okay, and then the 28th, we're going to hear about what's happened this legislative session. There's some interesting proposals, and both in the infrastructure proposed bill that's working its way through Congress, as well as the current CARES Act that beefs up affordable housing options. So Brenda will talk about all those things to us too.
Okay.
So thank you all for joining, and we will see you in, I guess, in 2 weeks, right? The 21st.
Sounds good.
All right.
Sounds good.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Good night.